Some of the most terrifying criminal cases are not marked by chaos or sudden violence, but by patience, deception, and trust slowly abused. The story of Dorothea Puente is one of those cases. To the outside world, she appeared gentle, charitable, and devoted to caring for society's most vulnerable. Behind that carefully constructed image, however, was a calculating predator who turned compassion into a weapon. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California, the sixth of 7 children. Her early life was defined by instability and neglect. Her parents struggled with alcoholism and ongoing financial problems, creating a chaotic household where emotional support and consistency were lacking. Growing up in this environment left Dorothea without a sense of security or trust, factors that would later shape her manipulative behavior and emotional detachment. As a teenager, Dorothea sought escape through marriage. At just 16 years old, she married her first husband, but the relationship quickly collapsed. This pattern of instability followed her into adulthood. She went on to have several troubled relationships, including another short-lived marriage. None provided the stability she seemed to seek. During this period, Dorothea began engaging in petty criminal activity, including theft, fraud, and deception, developing skills that would later serve her far more dangerous ambition. In 1960, her criminal behavior escalated when she was convicted of forging checks. She was sentenced to prison, marking her first serious encounter with the justice system. Rather than rehabilitating her, incarceration appeared to reinforce her ability to manipulate others. After her release in 1966, Dorothea attempted to reinvent herself, carefully crafting an image of respectability and trustworthiness that would allow her to operate unnoticed. That reinvention reached its most sinister form in 1976 when Puente opened a boarding house at 2100 F Street in Sacramento, California. The house catered primarily to elderly, disabled, and mentally ill individuals. Many of the residents relied on government assistance and had little family support. To neighbors and authorities, Puente appeared warm, generous, and deeply committed to helping those in need. She attended church, spoke kindly, and cultivated a reputation as a compassionate caregiver. Behind this facade, Puente was running a carefully planned operation built on exploitation and murder. She specifically targeted tenants who were isolated, dependent, and unlikely to be immediately missed. Her method was chillingly systematic. Puente poisoned her victims with overdoses of prescription medications, including sleeping pills and sedatives. Once they were incapacitated or dead, she dismembered their bodies and buried the remains in shallow graves throughout her backyard. Even after death, her victims continued to serve her interests. Puente collected their social security benefits, forging signatures and filing fraudulent paperwork to ensure the payments continued. This steady income allowed her to maintain her lifestyle and preserve the illusion that her tenants were alive and simply transient. For years, her calm demeanor and role as a caretaker shielded her from suspicion. That illusion began to collapse in 1988. Neighbors noticed a troubling pattern of residents arriving at the boarding house and then disappearing without explanation. Concerns escalated when a former tenant came forward, describing neglect, abuse, and mistreatment while under Puente's care. These reports prompted authorities to finally take a closer look. On November 11, 1988, police searched Puente's property. What they uncovered was horrifying. Human remains were discovered buried in the garden, triggering a full-scale investigation. Over the following weeks, investigators unearthed multiple bodies. Ultimately, the remains of at least 8 individuals were identified, all former tenants who had been reported missing. The evidence revealed that Puente had been living a double life, managing her boarding house while carrying out calculated and methodical murders. Puente fled briefly but was soon captured and arrested. Her trial began in 1990 and drew intense media attention.
You may know it as the boarding house murders, the Puente killings, or the bodies that were dug up on F Street. Over the years, the story of one of Sacramento's most notorious serial killers, Dorothea Puente, who drugged her tenants, then buried them in her yard, has only grown. And now it has a new addition, adding to the intrigue. As the birds chirp and the cars whiz by, the home where a cold-blooded caretaker turned unexpected killer once lived sits quietly, with messages finding humor in the horror, a mannequin resembling the woman behind it all, and now A QR code for the curious. Not to get in, but to dig in to the twisted tale that's given so many people that tragic tug to find out more. Scan the code.
This is the bottom floor, kitchen.
And it takes you to one of the more popular documentaries done on the Puente home, called The House is Innocent.
Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including forensic analysis, financial records, and testimony from former tenants and acquaintances who described her manipulative and predatory behavior. The defense argued that Puente suffered from mental illness and could not be held fully responsible for her actions.
Verdicts in the multiple murder trial of Dorothea Puente. A Monterey jury has found the former Sacramento landlady guilty of first-degree murder in 2 of the 9 counts she faced. Here's Channel 3's Mike Boyd with more.
Trial day 147. 64-year-old Dorothea Puente, unemotional, now knows that the jurors are deadlocked on 6 of 9 murder counts. Our dash.
After title of court and cause, count 4. We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Dorothea Montalvo Puente, guilty of the crime of murder in the 2nd degree of Leona Carpenter, a lesser included offense of that charged in count 4 of the information. Verdict, count 5. We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Dorothea Montalvo Puente, guilty of the crime of murder in the 1st degree of Dorothy Miller, as charged in count 5 of the information.
On March 19, 1990, Dorothea Puente was convicted of 9 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing a definitive end to years of calculated deception and violence. Throughout the trial, Puente displayed little to no visible remorse for her actions.
That the defendant, Dorothea Montalvo Puente, did commit multiple murders, to wit, at least 1 crime of murder of the 1st degree and 1 or more crimes of murder of the 1st or 2nd degree to be true.
The 3 victims named were all found buried in the boarding house yard in 1988. But of all of them, Ben Fink was mentioned most prominently in the trial. Puente became enraged with Ben's drinking bouts and said she would take him to her room to make him well. He was never seen again.
Her calm demeanor and detached behavior stood in stark contrast to the horrific nature of the crimes she was accused of committing. Rather than appearing overwhelmed or regretful, she often seemed indifferent, reinforcing the perception that her actions were driven not by desperation or emotional instability, but by greed, control, and a desire for financial gain. Testimony presented in court painted a picture of a woman who carefully selected her victims, exploited their vulnerabilities, and methodically eliminated them once they had served her purposes. The verdict confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Puente was not a caretaker who lost control, but a deliberate and calculating predator who manipulated trust as easily as she took lives. Her lack of remorse only deepened the public's horror, cementing her legacy as one of the most cold-blooded killers to exploit society's most defenseless individuals.
Hard, diligent, and we're going to urge them to vote life without parole, and we think that's how this case should end up. Thank you.
How did Dorothea take the news, Peter? Could you tell us that?
Not real good. Not real good. She was crying.
I don't have any comments to make. Period.
You've got to be pleased, though.
I'm happy and relieved.
To a circus. I mean, you know, we were, in fact, just today, I had some customers in here and we were talking about it, how the publicity of it all has just, you know, yeah, she's become, I mean, they made T-shirts, you know, about Dorothea.
I heard a lot of rumors about this lady, but I don't know if they're true or not.
Puente spent the remainder of her life incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. Compared to the horrors of her past, her years behind bars were quiet and uneventful. She died on March 27, 2011.
The F Street home where serial killer Dorothea Puente buried her victims has received a facelift and now is part of Sacramento's Old City Home Tour. KCRA 3's Sharkina Shams got a special tour with the lead detective that helped put Puente in prison.
With no hesitation, no pause, John Cabrera walks back into a place he hasn't seen in 25 years.
This is the place where she administered the drugs. You know, this is the room, and so I just think about that.
That was Cabrera in 1988. He was a Sacramento police sergeant and the lead detective who investigated the infamous F Street boarding house, where caretaker Dorothea Puente drugged and buried her tenants and collected their Social Security.
This is what we would call the death room. This is where she brought her victims after she had induced drugs into their alcohol. And she would place them here on the floor.
At the age of 82, Dorothea Puente's story remains one of the most disturbing examples of how evil can hide behind a friendly face. Her crimes highlight the extreme vulnerability of those living on society's fringes and serve as a stark reminder that danger does not always appear threatening. Sometimes it arrives with kindness, patience, and a promise of help, exploiting trust until it is far too late.